Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Being Muslim. Welcome back to the show. We've had a long break for Ramadan, a month for us to allow ourselves to recharge, re-energize, and to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And now that Ramadan has ended, we are back to our regular programming, inshallah. Today we have a guest with us. His name is Abu Bakr Siddiqui. He's an architect with RIBA, which we'll go into. Without further ado, I'll welcome our guest. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Okay. Jazakallah khair for accepting my invitation to the show. I just want to get stuck straight into it. You are an architect, and I mentioned a word that we used to hearing in a different context, riba. But this is not that riba. I've seen it written on people sign it off in their name. But can you please explain what RIBA, R-I-B-A is?
RIBA stands for Royal Institute of British Architects. And to be a qualified architect, the RIBA are basically are the ones who kind of the stages that we follow, education stages is kind of sort of set by RIBA. And then to be a qualified architect, you have to be registered with ARB, so that's the Architects Registration Board. And the stages that we go through in education is RIBA Stage 1, RIBA Stage 2, and then to become a qualified architect, you do RIBA Stage 3. That answers the question.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. So, what led you to train as an architect in the first place?
Oh God, that's going back years. Well, initially I thought I'd get to travel, but then I think it was also what architecture allows me to do is kind of merge my passion of travel with art and design. And so I can then, rather than just creating a painting, which I do anyway, and sculptures, I can actually then now create buildings that people can, it's almost like a sculpture that people can physically enter and exit and live in it and utilize.
Okay, mashallah. And you mentioned that you initially got into it for the art, for the designing things, and also for the traveling. Were you able to travel the world as you originally planned to?
Alhamdulillah, I've been really fortunate. I have been really, really fortunate. I think I used the course as an excuse to travel. So, and I think in order to do architecture, you need to travel.
Yeah.
Because you need to understand the different cultures. Because what we do, we help shape societies. And so if you only are stuck in one place, you won't have a holistic overview of how the society functions. So, I remember the very first time that I went to New York City. For me, it was, I just couldn't imagine it. You see it in certain ways on TV.
Yes.
But being there, looking at these tall skyscrapers, and then going into these skyscrapers, it's a phenomenal feeling. And someone who, at the time I was studying architecture, I could just imagine space differently.
Yeah, okay, mashallah. And in our previous conversation, you mentioned you also did a little stint in the Emirates, in UAE. Just wanted to ask, what led you to going abroad? When you mentioned you wanted to do architecture for traveling, I personally know a few people who have trained as teachers, and they've also traveled to similar countries, UAE, or for example, I have a family who have taught in Egypt for 3-4 years, and it allowed them to fulfill their idea of travel, living in a Muslim country as well, and enjoying the culture. And so how was that experience for yourself?
Well, for me, It was actually a fantastic experience because somewhere like working and living in Dubai, the kind of projects that you do, you're literally working on developing cities, you know, and it's not something that you're able to do here all the time. And you can work for big practices who work on master planning, but not at a scale or pace that I've worked in the UAE, and you know, and I've also had experiences and sort of designing projects that's been realised within the space of time that I was there, in a short space of time, and also you also have the creative freedom there.
Yeah.
It's very different from here, but over there, because the money is not an issue, so a lot of the time planning restrictions are not a restrictions there. So when you are developing, you suggest an idea. If the client likes it, you go with it.
Yeah.
Whereas here, it's very different, that approach. You have to almost convince people to sort of buy your design and ideas. Which, yeah, I mean, it's very different, and I think both of them have satisfaction.
Yes.
But I think, and both are an experience in itself. So, alhamdulillah, I was fortunate enough to be able to work here and there as an architect and experience it.
Okay, mashallah. And since you've been back, how has the projects been for yourself? Are you still working on developing projects like you were in UAE, or has it moved to something new?
I think my experiences have helped me think differently. In projects in UAE, I would be making projects for the rich, the super rich, and community aspect is very different approach.
Yeah.
But since coming back, I've started looking into sort of community projects and also international development with the architectural and environmental sustainability aspect. And I think because of the master planning and the scale of projects that I've worked on, it actually has given me the almost like the tools, skills set now to be able to apply it on particularly a project that I'm working on in Bangladesh, which is actually a small village, a humble village compared to the projects I worked on, and you know, it's looking at how we can develop a small village to become sustainable and plan, because the villages do grow.
Yeah.
And villages in Bangladesh do grow to become towns, and towns become cities. And if they grow, if they're not planned, then they grow unsustainably. And then what it means that there are then huge issues come as a result of it. And that's why my approach is to sort of, if we can approach the village of Khazirgaon, which is a village that I was born in, if we can develop it in a way where we can grow sustainably, then I think we're first step in a sustainable development within the area. So yeah, so inshallah.
Okay, mashallah. This word or this idea of sustainable development, you mentioned that things have to be sustainable, otherwise if they become unsustainable they become a problem. Could you elaborate on the problem of this exponential growth in a short period of time without becoming sustainable, for myself and the viewers as well?
Well, looking at Khazirgaon, I actually, in this particular project, I was working with, the initial stages I was working with Birmingham City University, the architecture department and landscape department, and also Shah Jalal University of Science and Technology in Sylhet. And it's working with the students, and I think the thing about working with the students is that they're able to then visualize and create a vision for the area that's, money is not an issue, and you can be as creative as you want. So it was an opportunity to show the villagers that this is a possibility. And the idea of the sustainability that comes down into it is that you create a development that takes into consideration the needs of the local people. When looking at the future, the population growth.
Yes.
And how you accommodate that. And with it, you're not just looking at accommodating, adding an extra room to your house, but space that they use, the roads that they use, the increase in transport, the transport connection, the drainage, and also medical care and healthcare. The village doesn't have a medical centre, or I don't think it has a GP. So if we were to create a medical centre, then people can access medical services without having to travel far.
Yeah.
And also the bazaar of Khazirgaon, Khazir Bazar, it's used by 8 other villages. So the population of Khazirgaon at the moment is, I think, 2,000 people. So if we multiply that by, let's say, 8, so the Khazir Bazaar not only is catering for the village of Khazirgaon, but also the 8 other
the other local villages surrounding.
So then, if they grow in 10 years' time, if it doubles, then 2 becomes 4, and then 4 becomes 8, and so forth. We would need to then create a bazaar, a village, road infrastructure, drainage infrastructure, and buildings to accommodate that. If we don't, what we are going to get is end up with a problem where the roads are not sufficient enough to accommodate the transport, the cars, and also the drainage is, they don't have drainage systems, so they just dump everything onto the lake or the canal. And then also you have the plastics on the side canal. You have all these plastic rubbish and things like that, but they're not going to go away if you don't do anything about it. So it's looking at the whole sort of scenario, and also with the increase of population, food. Where does that come from?
Yeah.
So you have to look at the farming, and Bangladesh is rich in farming. So why not use their sort of natural resources and skill sets and create possibilities and opportunities for the villages? And also that way, what would happen is that the villages can stay in their village and grow in their village rather than having to move to another city or a town.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that, and from what I remember, Bangladesh is one of the most densely populated countries on the earth, and it's the idea that the villages, they are becoming, they keep growing and growing, and they don't have these facilities and infrastructure, like as you mentioned, the GP's sewage system, drainage system,
and education,
and because of this, there's a lot of migration to the cities.
Yes.
And so it's a way to balance out the population density and not force it into the cities that are, in your research, are they struggling already?
Well, so for example, the nearest city to Khazirgaon is Sylhet. And Sylhet, people are moving to Sylhet, and there are a lot of people who are living in informal settlements. So these are on the periphery, the outskirts of the city. So they, again, what they're doing, they're taking the problems from the village to the city and creating a bigger problem. Because they don't have the facilities, medical facilities, jobs. A lot of them are living in poor conditions, and also education, healthcare, and all these things. again, in order to improve their lifestyle, they should be moving to something that gives them a better opportunities, gives them a better living standard. But actually, by moving to a city, a lot of people cannot afford it. Because when you move to a city, it becomes much more expensive. And even the city of Sylhet has its own issues, you know, the drainage issues, the buildings. There are buildings that are built poorly and not proper guidelines, infrastructure in place. And so if they are moving for opportunities, they are actually fall into a bigger problem. So the whole idea of the project that I'm working on is to create a smart village. A smart village is creating a village that has the basic infrastructure, roads, drainage, education, technology, and also job opportunities. With the technology, with access to internet, Wi-Fi, you can create opportunities for the future generation. And that can only happen through education, through supporting these sort of villages to provide infrastructure. And also understanding of what it is that they have and also understanding what they need, and educate them on what are the possibilities.
Okay, mashallah. It's sounds like this project, and regarding the project about your village, Khazirga, is that also in working with the University of which university was it in Sylhet?
Shah Jalal University of Science and Technology.
Okay,
we're working with the architecture department, and they've been phenomenal. They have been, and both Birmingham City University and SUST, which is Shah Jalal University of Science and Technology, they've been phenomenal because the students, the Professor Shaha, Kaushik Shaha, and the students went to the village. They'd surveyed the village. They did a sort of small workshop with the villagers and spoke to the villagers about, you know, what they will need, you know, and what are the issues they're faced with, and then of course they produce sort of reports, surveys based on that, and then they would then relay that information to the students in Birmingham City University, and then together in a group. And what we did was there was about 6 groups, and in 6 groups, about 6 students, and 3 were from Bangladesh and 3 were from UK. So with this sort of collaborative process happening between the local knowledge and international sort of knowledge, and then merging them together, and to create you know, a vision for the village. And so the students were amazing. The work that they produced, mashallah, I was so impressed. I was really, really impressed. And it's not an easy process, because you also have to understand that when you're doing these sort of projects, 2 cultures. The education approach is very different.
Yes.
The way we approach design is somewhat different to how projects are done in Bangladesh. But it's marrying of those differences is what has created these projects, and it's been phenomenal.
Okay. So so far it's been reports and I'm guessing
designing, yeah. They've done master planning for the villages.
Okay,
yeah,
mashallah. Has there been any projects that started to see fruition from
that's the next stage. That is the next stage, because the project also has been supported by Prince's Foundation and funded by Commonwealth Architects Association. And so our student, and this is, I think, one of its kind, this project, our students have actually followed a toolkit designed by Prince's Foundation. And normally this toolkit is used by professionals, government sort of entities, and mayors, and, you know, institutions. But this is the first time students are the actors
Yeah.
They're the one who are driving this toolkit in realizing this project. And also, this project has been selected as a pilot project for the Commonwealth Heads of Commonwealth Health Meeting, which was meant to take place in Rwanda next month, but because of COVID, it's been postponed.
Okay.
And we were also meant to have a workshop again in Bangladesh, in Khazargal, with the SUST, to sort of show them the projects that we've done, and also to have a discussion, have a dialogue with the community and see if this is something suitable for them, or how would they see their village grow, or how do they see their bazaar grow. And also there's actually an area, the site was split into three. The bazaar area, the Bumin, which is like equivalent to social housing area, and also the old village part, which is where the more richer, sort of affluent people who have relatives in the UK and other parts of the world. So they have sort of international remittance sort of to develop that part. So it's because of COVID, we've had to postpone again the workshop, which was meant to happen yesterday.
Okay. Yeah.
No, actually today. Today, it's Saturday.
SubhanAllah. So Jazakallah khair. Looks like this program, at least we can get the information out there.
Yes. Yeah.
And we're just going to go to a short break in a moment. But Jazakallah khair for sharing your experience in your training as an architecture, the why, some of the things that you're able, some of the places that you're able to do because of it, and bringing back that expertise to help the community, to help the community, especially those back home, where they can really use the expertise and really working with the University of Birmingham and the Sylhet University of Science and Technology. So Jazakallah khair for sharing that experience. We'll come back after the break, inshallah, to continue our conversation with Abu Bakr Siddiqui, our guest for today. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today we have our guest Abu Bakr Siddiqui, an architect and also a person who works with community projects. Before the break, Abu Bakr Siddiqui, he shared with us his experience in architecture and also how he's brought back to the community in Bangladesh his expertise and teach, or not necessarily teaching, but working with the students in the Sylhet University of Science and Technology with the University of Birmingham in creating new projects that will benefit the community in terms of architecture in Bangladesh. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Abu Bakr.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
So we've spoken just before the break about the community work abroad, and that's not the only community work that you do. You mentioned that you work with the local council. And I just want to ask, what is it exactly that you do? How is it that you engage with the council and the community?
Well, during COVID, the council has a lot of voluntary programs to support the local community, but they also then created this role to engage with the community, deep engagement. To sort of find out basically the difficulties that the families or the residents have gone through, or suffered as a result of COVID, and also going forward how we as local authority can support our residents. And so the whole program is called Deep Engagement Program, and so the deep engagement, because normally when engagements happen, it's usually top-down approach, and usually the communities are told, "This is, here you go. This is what we feel is good for you. This is what we're going to provide support." But this deep engagement is actually about engaging with the community, and then the community suggests what we need to do and how we can help them. So it's more of a bottom-up approach. And it actually is quite similar to the project that I'm also doing in Bangladesh, because normally it's the NGOs or the government that does project, and they just like, here you go and this is what you get. But the whole process is that we talk to the community and we ask what the community need, and then we want to help provide that. So coming back to my local authority job, we are working with the community to understand how we can support them, what are their difficulties that they face with, maybe sort of financial, maybe housing related issues, it may be health issues, because everyone's been cooped up in the house, and mentally it has been challenging.
Yeah.
And I can't offer advice for everything.
Yeah.
But what I can do is I can signpost people to the relevant department or relevant person who's dealing with that issue, and then they can take over to help the community. And I'm also particularly focused on helping the Bangladeshi community. One, because I speak the language, so I'm able to then speak to the vulnerable people who English is not that strong or they don't speak English at all. So then I can communicate the information to them in the language and in a manner that they understand.
MashaAllah. And this idea of community engagement with COVID, we're seeing the numbers go down, and we're seeing the Indian variant is becoming of concern. Would you say that we can stop being vigilant, or must we still continue being vigilant with COVID and everything that's going on surrounding that?
I think it's very important that I think it's important that we don't give up. And we don't give up being vigilant. And I think it's very important, even more so now, because we've come down and the government has relaxed a lot of things and will continue to relax things. The danger is, if we're not careful, we'll go back into another lockdown. And with the Indian variant, again, we have to be careful. We have to take the precautions, and social distancing and wearing the mask and washing our hands and so forth. And these are very important that we continue doing that, and until we are safe. We're not safe yet. We're taking precautions to allow the society to come back to as much normality as possible. Yeah. But it's not, we're still not out of the danger area.
I remember the feeling last summer in July, in August, where we were seeing cases drop down quite low, and everyone was starting to become relaxed. There was the whole Eat Out scheme. I forget what the full name is now. It was the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, and then we suddenly, as the schools opened up, I work in a school, so we were seeing the cases rise again and again, and then September, October, then it was starting to become another cause for massive concern, and then by November, pretty much every child in the school, there was entire year groups being sent home, and then. Within the holidays, just hearing from all the teachers that everyone got ill with COVID, and so the idea of relaxation. When you said we're not out of the woods yet, not relaxed, it just sort of made me remember the same feeling towards the end of summer last year, and
I think it's very important. You're right. Like last year, we had relaxed, and as a result, the consequence was that we had to go back into another lockdown. And again, if we're not careful, the same thing's going to happen again. And we are really nervous as local authorities to keep our residents, our communities safe. Because what we've seen is we haven't experienced it in our lifetime. And no one was prepared for it. So now this is an opportunity for us actually to make it safe for the local communities and residents. And we can only do that if we get help and support from our local people.
Okay. And the idea of help and support, you mentioned deep engagement. What exactly does that entail, reaching out to the community? Perhaps how are people receptive? You mentioned that you speak to some of the elders in Bengali. Now, you don't work in a Bengali densely populated borough like we probably see in parts of East London. What are some of the issues and concerns in getting the information to people?
I think the challenging part has been, for me, is to sort of reach the people and get them to come on board. Because there are a lot of stigmas attached to it. A lot of people are sort of embarrassed.
What do you mean on board first?
What I mean by on board is, because what it is, as part of my work, I have a team of volunteers who help me to cascade the information to the local communities, the residents, their neighbours and their families. And they can only do that if people are receptive. There are a lot of people who just have their guards up and they don't want to discuss it, they don't want anything to do about it. Because they feel like a lot of it is a propaganda, it's a conspiracy theory. And a lot of people have had WhatsApp messages and Facebook messages which are inaccurate. And as a result, a lot of people don't trust the government. Even local authorities, they don't trust them because they've seen alternative sort of messages that's been circulated. So, but our job is to make people realise that, you know what, the information that we provide are supported by the government, supported by the NHS, and we are also a local authority. So our information that we provide, it will not be false information. These information that we have gathered from various sources, reliable sources, and then we present that to the local communities. So, and also we do workshops with the local communities. If they have questions on sort of vaccination, we do vaccination workshops so that the residents can ask the professionals questions directly rather than having to ask us. And I'm not qualified to give information or any opinions, advice on vaccination.
So being an architect and not a doctor.
Exactly, exactly. I can give you advice whether your space is sufficient to keep social distancing and going forward, how we need to design spaces that are a lot more environmentally friendly and also social, allows us to keep the social distance, and also mental health. Environment, if we design a space well, that environment has a huge benefit, a mental impact on a person. And I think that's also something that's come to surface in this whole sort of pandemic. That environment that we live in makes, and even our neighbourhood, if we were in an affluent area, we'll have a lot more green spaces, a lot more trees in our sort of roads, and that has a huge benefit. Whereas a lot of the council estates, they don't have these green spaces. They don't have these sort of nice trees where they can sort of, even by looking at the green space, it's meant to give you a mental sort of almost a reprieve. But if you don't have that, you can't get that. And also during the pandemic, during the lockdown, a lot of people are cooped up in their flats. those who are lucky living in houses, they have a garden so they can go into that space, but those who live in apartments, they don't have that. So again, then designing a space in such situation that everyone can appreciate a public space, a communal garden, communal green space, and I think that's been my, as an architect, that's been my sort of journey in that, to sort of help and support people to get that.
Okay. So, mashallah. So, reaching out to, especially to the elderly who can't speak English as well, you mentioned that getting them on board and not being embarrassed. I was curious as to, in your experience, why they may be embarrassed.
May be embarrassed. I think a lot of the time, you know, if a family member has got COVID, a lot of people took that as, you know, they shouldn't have got it. You know, they haven't followed the process. So it's almost like blaming yourself.
Yeah.
And actually, there's nothing to be embarrassed about. You're not to be blamed. It's a virus, it's an airborne virus. You know. You may have gone to a space or an area, or you may have touched a surface that someone else has touched it, and that's how you sort of caught it.
Just like the common cold or the flu.
Yeah. So, you know, there's nothing to be embarrassed about. I think what's important is to talk about it. Because by talking about it, you're actually educating others on this subject matter. And also the journey that you go through. If you have COVID and you've gone through that sort of process of, alhamdulillah, recovering from it, many people have been unfortunate and they haven't recovered, and many families have suffered bereavement as a result of COVID. But if you talk about it, then people will see that, you know what, it is true. It does happen to everyone. And I think that's where a lot of people in the first phase felt like it's not going to affect them. But second phase is when it affected most people. And that's when people realize it's actually quite true. So by talking about it, you're actually sharing your experience and telling people, you know what, it does exist. And we need to help each other to protect each other. And so that's where I think communicating to the elders, and a lot of the elders, I also know Bengali families or spoken to people who have been isolated and they haven't had people that to talk to, and you know support with shopping and all these things. Unfortunately, our borough is very they've been actually really good. The support that they have been providing their residents, and there's a support there for people who haven't, who are not able to go out and do their shopping, people who don't have people to talk to, and also people who actually, you know, generally just scared and they need support. So by getting the elder generation and even the youth involved, the intergenerational conversation is very important, and that support is also very important.
And of course, there are, for example, local parks as well that are accessible. But I think, obviously, for many people, it will be quite the distance to get there in the first place. And so, as you mentioned, it's just finding that small space that's really nearby, and just applying. Speaking to the right people in the council, applying for the right funds, sounds like it can be beneficial for the entire community, not just for the one person who's at home. I just want to say that we are coming to the end of the show. So Jazakallah khair once again for accepting my invitation and shedding a light on architecture, but more so how you've given back to the community, especially in the Sylhet region, and pioneering this project, which inshallah may Allah take it to the next stage to start seeing developments within that. And Jazakallah khair for also just illuminating us on the facilities that are that the councils can give. Obviously, no specifics can be given because each council works differently, but generally, broadly speaking, the idea that funding and talking to the right people is there to help try to bring about these small architectural designs in the local community. Do you have any final words for advice for our viewers, whether it's to do with architecture or this project or anything?
I would say, you know, coming from a public health point of view, I'd say, you know, take care of each other and not and the community, and also support people who are in need. If you can't, if you don't need the support, there's always someone else who needs the support, and if you can direct them to the right sort of organisations, I think we can create a better community.
Okay, Jazakallahu khairan, Abu Bakr Siddiqui, for once again for coming today, and inshallah we'll be back next week with a special guest, inshallah. That's next Saturday at 3 p.m. Jazakallahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.